President, Council of Foreign Relations. Welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Mr. Minister, thank you so much, and thanks everybody for being here. Why don't we start with an assessment of President Zelensky's visit here? What did it accomplish? Are you satisfied with the progress?
Well, it was an excellent opportunity for him to reach out to both political and business audiences, global political and business audiences, and I think he took it all, and as he usually does. So I think the speech, I mean, it's up to you to assess the speech of the president and the messages that he conveyed, but in my view, it was a very powerful and strong one. He held bilateral meetings with representatives of Africa, Asia, debunking to a certain extent the argument that it's Ukraine, it's only the Western power, the member of the Western community. And some specific agreements were made, including the one with President of the European Commission to finally begin the screening of Ukrainian legislation as an important step towards our accession talks. So, as far as I'm aware of, he left Davos in good mood, which is always good when your president is in good mood, right?
It's good for career stability, I think.
That does not depend only on this, I can tell you.
Early in the war, you reportedly had a meeting with Sergei Lavrov in which you challenged him to say what did Russia want out of the war. They say that their interests have not changed, but what do you think Russia is now looking for out of the war?
I think one element that Russia can be credited for is the sustainability of aggressive intentions. So they still believe that they can make it. They still believe they can destroy Ukraine. They can return Ukraine into their sphere of influence. I'm pretty certain from what I know about Russia and its current kind of state of mind is that they will not stop in Ukraine. And therefore, goals, the goals of, and the most recent comment by President Putin, I think 2 days ago, where he said that we will not give up on what we achieved, clearly demonstrates that he's still in a war mood. And he made his choice. I think he made his choice to spend the rest of his life fighting. And we should, I don't know, is there such a word as disillusion him? Yes, to defeat his illusions about that he can do that he can keep fighting endlessly.
There's a lot of talk in the Western press about there being divisions within Ukraine and within the government and between the government and the military, including over the age of conscription and some of the war aims. How do you see these trends? How do you assess how much unity or division there is within Ukraine?
Well, as long, let me bring a parallel from football or from basketball, the sports that I love.
American football or?
It's American basketball.
Okay.
Yes. So, as long as the team plays well on the pitch and players help each other and score goals, what happens beyond the field should not bother anyone. That's a different story. And I think that's exactly what's happening. President Zelensky built a strong team that plays and delivers in the best interests and wins in the best interests of Ukraine and more broadly global security. But you should always remember as well that Ukraine is a democracy. And democracy implies that people have a voice. And democracy implies the right to deliver your opinion, to debate it. And those who are looking for divisions in Ukraine, they should not forget that as democracy, we will always remain vibrant in our discussions, in our conversations, but we all know who our enemy is, and whatever kind of discussions we are having, we will remain united in defending the country and defeating the enemy.
These issues do end up playing into the debate that's occurring in the United States about support for Ukraine? And as we were discussing upstairs, it's, there's a majority of both parties in Congress who would support further aid for Ukraine, but our Congress is now set up in such a way that a tiny minority can prevent that from happening or put up a number of obstacles. How worried are you, one, about the debate in the United States? And do you think that coming out of Davos and the administration going back to Washington, they'll be able to rally the support necessary? And are you seeing signs in Europe, Western Europe, or Europe generally, of a decline in support for Ukraine as well?
I look at it from a slightly different perspective. I think that the point is not in getting worried about something. The point in fixing problems. Because this is real life. And there will always be someone or something that wants to provoke you, that wants to put you in a weak position and make you react in an inefficient way. And this is why, as a nation, you have to exercise self-control. And instead of worrying about something, first, prevent problems from appearing, and second, always have tools to fix problems if they appear. So we are not worried, but it doesn't mean, I'm not trying to say that we are not recognizing the obstacles and the issues we have to work with. But we've been told so many times throughout our independence, and especially in the last 2 years, you're not going to get that, and you are not going to get this, and this is the end. And then immediate sudden death is the next step, that you kind of get adapted to it, and you just don't hear these voices because this is all noise. What really matters is that we always get what we want sooner or later. And our job is to make it happen sooner rather than later.
If the U.S. Congress fails to approve the $60 billion package, do you anticipate Europe going ahead and continuing or increasing their level of support for Ukraine?
Well, let me speculate here that the level of excitement that I felt among EU leaders and foreign ministers on the night the European Council decided against all odds, which is against one odd, that equals to all odds, decided to open accession talks. So the reason for that, in my view, and it's my speculation, I'm ready to discuss it with anyone who disagrees, but I think they felt the strength in themselves. They felt that they can make big decisions, not in a follow-up to big decisions made by the United States, but against the background when the United States are kind of still working on big decisions. Europe is capable of making them. And that gives us a clear understanding that Europe is capable, and Europe should not underestimate itself, and it should not continue in a way that, oh, we will not be able to sustain without the United States. Guys, you have to sustain, because this war is happening in Europe, because the next country that will be attacked after Ukraine will be a European country. And we see this confidence being built, confidence of Europeans in Europe is being built step by step. It takes time. It doesn't happen in a blink of an eye. But I think we are definitely on that trajectory. That, of course, does not give an excuse to US congressmen not to make big decisions.
Let's bring another country into this, which is China. China, Russia announced a friendship without limitations on the eve of the start of the war. There's been a real effort to try and block China from providing lethal aid to Russia. How do you feel that effort is going? Can more be done? And do you think China, at the end of the day, can play a role in helping to broker peace between Russia and Ukraine?
I had another session, I think, in that wing of the building with Daniel, the editor of the Foreign Affairs, and I told him, and I'm forced to repeat it, that I hate answering questions where I have to be diplomatic. But that's exactly the question.
I'm sure this is all off the record, right? You're among friends. You don't have to be diplomatic.
But this is exactly that kind of question. So let me be a diplomat here. Given the role China can potentially play for both sides or on both sides in this war, we have to ensure that China understands our narrative and our perception, that the Russian narrative and perception does not dominate the thinking in Beijing. And second, that China will be carefully assessing the global consequences of potential move that may be seen destructive from the perspective in terms of supporting Russia in this conflict. We have to admit that Russia is a partner of China. It's a minor partner, and China is perfectly aware about the trajectory of Russia. And I think intelligent people in Russia are also aware about the trajectory of Russia in the Russian-Chinese relationship, and it's not good for Russia. But China needs Russia in the United Nations Security Council, as a source of raw materials, and in many other aspects. So we have to be carefully balancing this relationship with China, but at the same time, it should be clear to our colleagues in Beijing what the real consequences will be if lines will be crossed.
One of the collateral effects of the war has been to forge this access between China, Russia, North Korea, Iran. What do you think the long-term consequences of that are for the region?
Well, I understand the context of the narrative, but I think it would be more fair to say that we currently have a trilateral axis, which is a quadrilateral axis, but China is not part of it, because the members of this axis are Russia, Belarus, North Korea, and Iran. And the criteria for being a part of this group is that these three countries are providing Russia with military equipment and weapons. China is not doing it as a government, and therefore I think this distinction, it will be fair to make this distinction. Broader kind of political alignment is one thing, but when it comes to war, it gets really very specific. And what matters in the assessment is the number and the quality of countries who can provide you with hardware that helps you to win. And on that account, by the way, the coalition on the side of Ukraine is far more stronger than the coalition on the side of Russia. And I made this point already today, but I think it will make sense to repeat it, that if you take together the combined GDP of all countries who provide Ukraine with military aid, it will be 21 times higher than the combined GDP of Russia and countries who provide it with military aid. So any conversation about the inability to help Ukraine or the war fatigue or anything of that kind, or the inability to win in the war of attrition, these arguments do not meet reality check. The West or the countries behind Ukraine are capable if they wish.
So let's talk about the war on the ground itself. You laid out in a Foreign Affairs article what progress you hope to see with the counteroffensive. This was back, I think, in 2022. That progress has not been fully achieved. What are the lessons to be learned from the counteroffensive, and how does it affect Ukraine's approach going forward?
Control over air. This is truly fundamental. The second lesson is the pace of the transformation of war. The war started as tank artillery war, and it will continue as drone artillery war. I'm not saying that tanks will become completely irrelevant, but but we are talking about what will be the main striking force on the battlefield. And the third lesson is that, well, actually it's not a lesson for me, because I was always of the opinion that it doesn't matter how much you dislike Russia and despise them, but you have to respect them because they are an enemy. And the lesson is always respect your enemy. Again, from football, my favorite football team, Dynamo Kiev, won many games in the European Championship because they were disrespected by the opponents. They were not taken seriously. Who are these guys from Eastern Europe? And who knows where Eastern Europe is? We will do it like this. So, but the enemy learns quite fast. And unfortunately, it took some people in Kiev time to realize that the enemy learns his lessons, and it has to be respected.
Ukraine has reportedly been engaged in talks around peace in Riyadh in December, I think perhaps prior to Davos. Russia's not at the table, neither are countries like China or Brazil. What do you hope to get out of these talks? And are these talks on the basis of President Zelensky's 10-point plan, or are there priorities within those 10 points that are being preferenced?
Well, first, I think we are setting up a precedent in international relations when the terms of peace are being defined by the country that was attacked. It's not the aggressor who defines peace terms. It's not the third party, as it is the case in most of the cases of wars, when you need a third party that steps in, pretends to be neutral or is neutral, and offers you a peace deal. No, we, as the country that was attacked, exercise our sovereign right to define the terms on which this war is going to end. And I think this is an important precedent for international relations and for in the historical perspective. Second, let's get back like 2 years ago, October 2022, the G20 summit on Bali, where President Zelensky joined them online, and he delivered a speech with this presenting his peace formula. Back then, everyone was talking about different peace plans coming from country A, country B, country C. 2 years since, everyone is talking peace formula by Ukraine. And I think it's really important that we make everyone focused on the on Ukraine's proposal. And third, and not someone else's proposals. And third, it doesn't matter how many statements Russian officials will make that it all doesn't make sense because Russia is not there. But the first coordination meeting on peace formula started with 15 countries and organizations represented, and the fourth one had 83, representing Europe, Latin America, Africa, Asia. I think it speaks for itself that countries are getting engaged into this conversation, and that's exactly what serves our strategic interests.
Is it too early to talk about the reconstruction of Ukraine once peace is achieved? And how do you assess the various efforts out there, one, to deploy frozen Russian assets, two, to mobilize the private sector to look at Ukraine as a place of possible investment?
Yeah, it's never too early to talk about reconstruction, also because it's a very encouraging conversation when people realize that there is a new future. I think the starting point here is that the Ukraine that will come out of the war will be almost completely different from Ukraine that was attacked in February 2022. In a good sense, because the amount of different kinds of transformations that country is going through is enormous. And we often get commended for making reforms in types of war. This is my personal opinion. I don't speak on behalf of the government of Ukraine. But I think the lesson we learned is that the war is the best time for reforms. Because you can, when you have an interagency meeting and you tell guys, if we don't do this, we're gonna die. it's gone. The discussion is gone. You know, no one is trying to pursue his vested interests, so to say, in this discussion. Because people are, if you say, guys, if you don't vote this law, we will not become members of the EU, it works. And the amount, I don't think anyone is fully aware of the amount of transformation, legislative, legal, political, cultural, that Ukraine is going through. So in this sense, the recovery of Ukraine has already begun. But then we need money to actually build stuff. And money can come from three sources. Private investment, and there are people in this room who are much smarter than me on these issues, so I will not dwell too much on that. It's sovereign funds, like macro-financial assistance coming from countries to support recovery. And the best source to complement all of them is the Russian frozen assets. And this discussion that we are observing now about the legal impediments or the legal hurdles on the way towards using Russian frozen assets, both sovereign and oligarchic, for the purpose of Ukraine, I think it's hypocritical, and I will explain why. First, because bankers and lawyers, they always know how to adapt rules to their needs, and I don't believe they cannot do it this time. Second, when the same bankers and lawyers were eagerly engaging into work with Russian dirty money, they were not thinking that much about legal constraints. They were finding the way to work with this money and to make profit on it. And third, you know, if the same logic was followed, let's say, during the Second World War, we wouldn't have had neither Nuremberg Tribunal nor Marshall Plan for Europe, because there were no precedents in the past. And my question to everyone engaged in this conversation is, guys, if you do not think that the current situation requires historic decisions which go beyond existing rules and adapt rules to reality, then you don't understand what is happening. And you will lose both your credibility and your money. So, and the last argument that I'm hearing is that if we take these frozen assets away, then it will discredit the Western financial system for other wealthy actors in the world. Well, I mean, if you are thinking that you want to keep money of someone who is committing aggressions, war crimes, genocidal crimes against humanity, then you're probably, you know, doing the wrong thing in your life. And second, the moment assets were frozen, the message was out. That's it. Everyone who was thinking about credibility already changed his bank deposit. So I think we're moving towards the solution to end up with an optimistic mood, in an optimistic mood. I think the issue now is not whether this money will be used, they will, but the question is how much of it. And the conservative plan is only to use taxation on interest and maybe some part of interest, but that's not enough. It's not going to work. I apologize for this long answer, but it's the first time I engage in such a detailed discussion on this, so I just had to express myself. Thank you for the opportunity.
I'm a lawyer who once worked at a bank, so I felt like you were, you know, sending me a message in your answer. I'm going to do one more question, and then to the degree we have time, we'll open it up to the audience if they have a couple of questions. Do we have time? Okay. All right, the last question. This is a big election year around the world, but including in Russia, Ukraine, and the United States. The Russian outcome seems fairly certain. What's your assessment of how various outcomes in Ukraine and the United States might affect this conflict going forward?